I am grateful for Wendell Griffen hosting this meeting. I'm grateful for his being on our board of directors. And each week he contributes a sermon manuscript to ethicsdaily.com. So if you're a minister in search of a sermon, I have a website where you can find at least one good manuscript every week. So we're glad that Wendell's on our board of directors and posts sermon manuscripts and contributes a regular column to Ethics Daily. I want to acknowledge several other people. Ray Higgins is the executive director of the CBF of Arkansas and is helping us supporting this event and promoting the event. And I'm grateful that Ray is here. I want to introduce Kevin Hefner, who's the chair of the board of directors of the Baptist Center for Ethics in the very back. And Randy Hyde is here, and he also contributes sermons to Ethics Daily. So we have a strong... We have a lot of Arkansas connection, and Drew Smith contributes columns, and he teaches at, is it Henderson? Henderson, and we're glad he's here. This documentary would not be possible without the vision and without the determination of Steve Copley, the director of the Justice for Our Neighbors program at United Methodist Ministry. Some 14 months ago, Steve Copley called me and said, "Have y'all ever thought about doing a documentary on immigration? Would you like to do a documentary on immigration?" And we began to collaborate and conspire. And you're going to see in a few minutes the short version of Gospel Without Borders. But know that this documentary would not be possible without his proactive initiative and his steadfast determination that we would produce a documentary that would be ecumenical in nature and would advance the common good. So I'm very grateful for my partnership with Steve Copley and for his proactive initiative and his determination to pursue the common good. We also want to thank the United Methodist Foundation of Arkansas for their primary funding of this documentary. What I'd like to do now is to step aside. We will watch the short version of the documentary, then have a response by three special individuals who you will recognize soon. So let's watch, go ahead and cue up the short version, and we'll turn down the lights and watch the documentary.
Somos de la iglesia.
¿Y la razón que está cruzando la frontera?
Trabajo.
Looking for work.
There's no work in Mexico.
No hay trabajo en México.
Sí, pero no gana mucho.
There is work, but you do not earn enough to sustain yourself. ¿Su familia le dijo que era bueno que usted venía aquí buscando para trabajo? No, they did not.
No lo saben.
They don't even know that he crossed the border coming, looking for work.
The Arizona border is the area where most of the traffic has been pushed by the policies of the United States Border Patrol. Since 1994, they sealed up cities and they pushed people out into the deserts. And this section of the Arizona border is about 260 miles, and about half the migrant traffic comes through this section of a border. And we have about half the deaths that occur with migrants in this Tucson sector.
We have a permanent presence in the desert during the deadliest months of the year. And we go out from that camp and hike the migrant trails and actively search on foot for migrants who are in distress. The Bible says over and over and over again that we have to care for the alien in our midst as one of our own. Jesus doesn't leave us any option at all. If we say we love Jesus, then Jesus says in Matthew 25, I was hungry, I was thirsty, I was sick, I was in prison, I was an alien stranger. And as you do it to these, you do it to me. That's the complete description of the migrant in our midst and in our desert. Hungry, thirsty, sick, in prison, and an alien. And if you don't see the face of Jesus in that person, then you fail to see the gospel.
Somos de la iglesia. Tenemos agua, comida, medicina. No tengan miedo.
This is a very dangerous path. So it's not surprising that within this dangerous path, while walking through the valley of the shadow of death, literally, you have something like this shrine where you stop here, you pray here, you leave a symbol of your faith. Here's a testimony of a people who are praying to a God that would liberate them from not only the economic hardships that they're suffering in their country, but also the dangers of the trail that we are on in trying to get to the promised land. So these become important religious symbols of hope for people who at this point in their lives have no hope.
I mean, what people don't realize is these are, for the vast, vast majority of folks who are coming here, members of our churches, people of faith. If we can just get people to open their Bibles and look at what the Scripture says about the alien in our midst and how Jesus identifies with the very alien stranger in our midst, then maybe we'd have some real spiritual renewal and strength to this movement.
Yeah, well, basically, it's improved two things. One, that they are organizing a relationship. That is, has to be perfect. There's no...
If I have a problem with my neighbor, and instead to sit together and try to resolve the problem, try to build fences to don't see my neighbor, that's not resolve my problem. I think it's better to sit together and explain the difference that we have and try to resolve the problems, because we will be neighbors forever.
Many of the things we do as a country are the diametrical opposite of what Jesus would ask us to do. And people recognize that. And naturally they will come to places where they encounter Jesus. And when people are rejecting of them or acting ugly, Jesus is not to be found there. This is not where I find Christ. If they go to a place that has a steeple, but they don't find self-sacrificing love, they've not found a Christian community.
El idioma que tú usas para presentarte será el idioma que yo uso para confirmarte. Si quieres ser confirmado en inglés, preséntate en inglés. Si quieres ser confirmado en español, preséntate a mí en español.
Every new wave of immigration has a resistance from the people who are established and settled and seem oblivious to the fact that, you know, they were that ethnic group not too long ago. So it's, you know, it's a fear of other. I think a lot of it is a fundamental notion of fairness, that why allow someone to benefit from breaking the law?
Americans tend to have an absolutized concept of law, and that if it's the law, it's the law, it's the law, and may give lip service to a higher law, but in fact don't give that higher law much weight. We say we're one nation under God, but we don't act that way.
Seems to me that the Christian perspective is our concern ought not to be where states draw their lines and where laws are drawn, but rather about how we respond to each child of God individually. Others have other concerns, but people of faith ought to be concerned about our relationship with one another. It's disappointing that people live with half-truths and misperceptions and simply do not want to go beyond that.
One reason why there's so much misinformation is that we've got in our society demagogues who purposely promote things they know to be lies, but they do it because it sells. People have the false impression that you can simply go to the embassy and get in line, and that's not the case.
There are just so many more people who are seeking to come into the U.S. legally than our quota system allows at the present time.
Almost everybody would go through the gate if they could.
The misperception among the population is that the people who have come here illegally chose to break in line, chose to do something illegally as opposed to do something legally, when there is no legal avenue for them to just raise their hand and say, I would like to come to the United States and work. I think a lot of the reason that people think these folks are a threat to us is because they have a totally legitimate belief that this person would choose to break the law when they had the opportunity to follow the law. It's a legitimate belief, it's just incorrect.
They paid sales taxes, they paid income taxes, they paid property taxes.
It's ironic that there's a perception out there that that people who are here working illegally aren't paying taxes. They are paying taxes, they're just not getting the benefits of the taxes that they're paying.
I have a situation here with a Mexican national that working in one of the golf course here for more than 17 years. During that 17 years, they paid the money to the same Social Security. And then ICE arrest him and deport him to Mexico. And what happened with all the money that he paid? And it's just one case.
The Social Security has, an enormous slush fund of money that's being paid in by undocumented workers that will never be reclaimed by those workers. And they're kind of using it as a little cushion without making a big show about it. If you're undocumented, you're not eligible for a Social Security number. But you can, if you're using a Social Security number that is not yours, or if you're using a made-up Social Security number, and you give it to your employer, they will still withhold the Social Security tax, and they'll send it off to the Social Security Administration.
Immigrants currently do not receive hardly any benefits. There is a false impression that immigrants are getting all kinds of public benefits here.
Often the services that are provided to Americans aren't available to foreign nationals, especially if they're here without proper documentation. But nevertheless, they're paying sales taxes, they're paying withholding taxes, they're paying all of the other normal taxes that anyone else would pay. But without being able to use the benefits, it turns into a net revenue gain for the state of Arkansas.
The Rockefeller Foundation here in Arkansas did an unbiased study on that issue and said, no, in point of fact, the people who are here that have no documentation are actually adding more back to the state coffers than the amount of money they're taking out.
Some of the most ugly vocal people style themselves as Christians in this discussion. That's the scandal.
Some of it is cowardice on the part of religious leaders, that we're unwilling to speak a truth that our people don't want to hear. And some parishioners or some congregates will react in a very ugly way. But, you know, I tell people they didn't crucify Jesus for nothing.
I was born in Mexico, and at 3 years old, I moved to California with my family. While I was in there, that's when I became a Christian. Being inside my cell, alone with nobody, I got on my knees and I remembered what my dad showed me to do. Repent in your heart, accept Jesus Christ, confess Him as your Lord and Savior, and you will be saved. And that's exactly what I did.
Well, we decided to come to North Carolina, first of all, because of North Carolina's growing Hispanic population. And our goal is to reach the Hispanic community. Siler City in Chatham County, when we moved here, was 60% Hispanic. That's why we chose this area. The moment that I found out that it was immigration officials at our door, I fell to my knees and began to pray.
I never expected them to come to my house and take me away the way they did, but it was a total of about 8 officers that came on that Thursday morning at 7 a.m.
I felt like crying, but I had children watching me and I didn't want them to be scared. I immediately got on the phone and started making some phone calls. I called our lawyer, and I called friends and family to pray.
They're going to drop all the charges and pretend none of this ever happened. That's what I think is going to happen.
If Hector was to be deported, we would have to make a decision to either leave the country or to be split up, which is a hard decision either way you look at it. We have 7 members of our family who are American citizens and 1 who is trying to become one. I believe that we face a challenging time ahead, but I believe God will be with us and He's going to carry us through.
First of all, I think a lot of people don't understand that there is no line for them to get in. They cannot come legally. The only way for them to come is to come illegally. Also, I think we need to keep in mind that segregation was a system of laws. Segregation was thoroughly legal and thoroughly immoral. The deportation of Japanese Americans to internment camps in World War II was thoroughly legal and thoroughly immoral. Although we hold the law in regard, we don't confuse the law with God. I don't think we need to confuse Caesar and God. I've been asked so many times about my having forgiven Mr. Ortega, and you know, I hate to claim too much of the moral high ground on that because it was never a struggle. I never felt any anger towards him. He took the best part of every day. there were quite a few people who were very, very upset that the driver had been here without papers and basically wanted to have him drawn and quartered. They wanted his head. I think there were a lot of people who had those feelings. Those feelings came up in the city council meeting that occurred just a few days later. What to do about these illegals? Kind of response. What was expressed to me was, by Hispanics, they felt hurt that my daughter had been killed and it had been a Latino migrant. They were really devastated by that. They were bad hurt. They were bad hurt.
We did suffer the war really bad because every time we go to school, we have to count how many dead people on the street without heads and without hands. Or the war was terrible. So I stopped and think with my girlfriend, who is my wife right now, and we said, well, we get married and we have to lead the way and go to the north. We did have all these problems in the sanctuary. That's the way it was before. That's how it looked in the ceiling of the sanctuary before. Many places like that one that were falling apart, dangerous places. This is the way it looks now. I'm really glad to be here and to help to renew something that other communities did. We want to rebuild the community, rebuild the building again.
The whole reason that the church has enough energy to rebuild itself is because the Latinos came and gave them a younger generation. The very fact that they're here and participating in this building is a renovation of the congregation. So then you go to renovation of the building. There is an incredible pride.
A little boy without shoes comes to the United States and then leading a work that have to be done in a church. That is a lot, it's a lot for me to be here, and that's by faith to come and do it. God is good.
If a large part of the population has bought into the fear and fear-mongering that is on TV and on radios, that sort of starts seeming like I guess that's the way it is.
Well, we're fortunate to have 3 of the documentary interviewees here tonight, and very fortunate we could schedule them on the same night to be on a panel to respond to the documentary. So I want to invite people that you have already met to come to the table, and if you would each find a seat and then take about, I think we're going to move the table. Okay. I think they're going to pull out the table, and then I'll introduce our panelists, and they will respond to the documentary, each about 10 minutes, and then we'll open it up for a conversation with you about the documentary and their perspective. I really like the way the documentary ended. Everything is going to be all right. I think everything is going to be all right if we can get Baptists, Catholics, and Methodists collaborating to advance the common good together. Let me begin alphabetically. Paul Charton is an attorney, an immigration attorney that you met in the documentary, and he's with the Catlett Law Firm here in town. Bishop Anthony Taylor is the Catholic bishop for the state of Arkansas, and Bishop Charles Crutchfield is the Methodist bishop for the state of Arkansas. And why don't we begin with Charles, if you, Paul, if you'll take a few minutes and give us your feedback about the documentary, and then we'll move through sequential order, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
You've received compliments from everyone that's shown it to. And I appreciate you and Steve Copley inviting me to participate in it. I think I more than I was able to educate through my participation in this, and unusual perspective, I think, that people don't get very often in the immigration debate, and I appreciate that you get it. I think that every person who sees it is going to be enlightened by it, and for that I'm grateful. The rhetoric in immigration debate is usually so heated that no one actually learns anything. And in this particular documentary, I think everyone in this room learned something by viewing it, whether it's just reconnecting with some religious values that you never put into this context, or if it was perhaps a legal nuance of the immigration system that you had never been exposed to. I'm an immigration attorney, and I'm not going to take up my whole 10 minutes because I would like to allow you guys to, I would like to let them speak longer and allow you a larger opportunity to ask questions. But Bishop Taylor and I were juxtaposed there at one point in the documentary talking about the line. Why don't they just get in line? And we heard several times mentioned that there really is no line. And I at one point said, well, the line is 12 years long, 18 years long. And so I just wanted to kind of clear up something that people don't understand about immigration in the United States. I said that in the documentary, I said that there are far fewer people who want to enter into the United States than our immigration system allows. And right before I came here, I pulled up a couple of the they do is that
that our government and our society has taken it upon itself to make a class of incredibly hardworking, adventurous, industrious people into a criminal class that we ostracize from our society. And that's part of the reason that I do this, and it's part of the reason that I wanted to participate in the documentary. Thank you.
And of course, for those who have no relatives whatsoever in the United States, there is no line.
There is no line. And if you're from Mexico, you can't sign up for the diversity lottery because there's plenty of Mexicans.
Just a couple of comments that I would have is, I believe this is the first effort involving both members of the Catholic, Baptist, and Methodist churches, which are the three largest Christian denominations in the United States, to work together on this topic.
And it's clear that no single group is going to be able to accomplish the reform our country needs. And it's really, to my mind, inspiring that the Lord has provided us with this opportunity to work together on a topic that there are no denominational issues on this topic. And this is something that we can certainly work together on as Christians. And it's a topic that I think any Christian that's sincerely trying to do what Jesus would have us do would be very clear on what's involved here. And I've arranged, and with Ethics Daily, we'll be sending copies of this CD with my letter to all of the bishops in the United States, Catholic bishops in the United States, telling them that, and this is, got some priests here that this is the first time they're hearing this, but I've also gotten copies for all of the priests in our diocese, and we'll be asking our parishes to use this documentary as a 4-week study time during Lent throughout our diocese. And I'm telling the other bishops that's what I'm doing. Wouldn't that be a good idea for your diocese? And so I just wrote the letter. The Ethics Daily is contributing all the DVDs. And so wouldn't it be a good idea for all the Methodist bishops and all the... So anyway, I believe that this is... and this is ecumenism the way it ought to be. We're not arguing about doctrine. It's about seeing how we can work together to build the kingdom of God in our own midst. There are two fundamental questions that arise in my own mind. One of the things I really like about the documentary is it shows so many different facets of the experience of immigrants in our country. Two fundamental questions, I think, that underlie the national debate that are crucial are, do people, in fact, have an intrinsic, God-given right to immigrate when circumstances so require? Parents are obligated to provide for their children. And if they cannot do so in their country of origin, then they have an obligation before God to search for other options. And so there comes a point when people immigrate without proper papers in the exercise of a fundamental human right that they have. And I think that part of the debate is missing in our national conversation, that the people have a right to come here. We have a right to facilitate the process for the common good, but not to impede people in the exercise of their human rights. And the second one is just in what does the binding force of law consist? The law is not absolute. There's a higher law. When do we come to the point where it's a sin to obey an unjust law? Okay, it was a sin to force people to sit in the back of the bus. It was and so I think people need to hear that there are some of our laws that if we obey them, we're committing a sin because we're contributing to the oppression of a people. And in line with that, I think that anytime you hear somebody discussing and usually dismissing the idea of amnesty is really not the right word, because it's not appropriate to describe giving legal status to people who have come here in the exercise of their human rights. Amnesty is what you give. You're forgiving someone for breaking a law, and a law that they should not have broken. Okay, when we talk about someone exercising their human rights, I mean, there was no talk of amnesty for people that participated in the lunch counter sit-ins. Okay, there was no, and so what we really need is welcome. And that's the proper attitude. And sometimes this earned citizenship or whatever is predicated on paying fines and asking forgiveness. Well, in fact, the persons who should be asking forgiveness is us from the people that we have oppressed, rather than the other way around. And a final observation, I'm sure you must have noticed it, but just to point it out, the issue of immigration is not just a white Hispanic issue. It's an issue for our whole society. And St. Peter Parish in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, is a historically African-American parish. That's why we had that kind of music going on there. And that parish has done a very good job of welcoming immigrants into their community. And it used to be a almost entirely African-American parish. It's now about 40% Hispanic and 60% African-American. And it's wonderful. Everybody knows each other. And it's just a wonderful environment there. And so I think that's another part of our immigration story that never seems to make the news.
It's good to be the last speaker because you can say, well, they really said everything I need to say. A couple of things. First of all, how can we express our gratitude to Bishop Taylor for being an outspoken, courageous, articulate spokesperson for the cause of people who seek to sojourn inside the United States of America? I just am deeply appreciative of that. Quite frankly, he puts the rest of us to shame, and I'm so proud to be a part of this in some small way with him. The second thing I would say is that I'm never going to do this again because the camera adds more weight to my face than I really want. And that's not fair. I've already got too much weight there. But the third thing I would say to you is simply this, that while the video does not directly speak to this, it certainly implies it. And that is part of what our concern here as Christians, is that we're concerned about family values. And it's terribly distressing to me to hear from people who say they claim and embrace family values, who then speak with such a narrow perspective on the issue of immigration. I think we've had a kind of an interesting experience here in Arkansas when the I've forgotten whether it's ICE or INS or whoever it was raided some plants up in northwest Arkansas and separated families, parents from their children, didn't even allow for families to go home, parents to go home and care for their kids. You remember when that happened? And I frankly was never more proud of Governor Huckabee than his attitude at that time. I don't know whether he'd say the same thing now or not, but he was furious, and he ought to have been, as we all should have been. One of my concerns is that we have not done enough to promote the idea of family values and immigration as having coalesced. The other thing, and it's related to this, is I am deeply concerned that the Christian community has not done enough to affirm and support the ideas behind the DREAM Act. I find it to be incomprehensible that somehow or another in this country we would find people who say that we ought to punish a child for the act of a parent. I mean, whoever gave us the right to go to war against children? You know? And as I thought about this one day, driving down the road somewhere, it occurred to me that if we applied that same principle to the rest of jurisprudence in this country, think of how many children would be in jail with their parents. Just think of it. Think of what we would do to family values. So I draw encouragement from the video to get back in the game around support for renewed efforts to pass the DREAM Act and support to find an appropriate way into citizenship for people who seek to come to this country. You know, give me your tired, your poor, the wretched refuse of your teeming shores. Send these, the homeless, tempest-tossed, to me. I lift my lamp beside the golden shores. Well, this helps to spur me back to that, and I'm looking forward to the opportunity. And thank you for being here and being interested in this.
Thank you very much. We are going to provide you an opportunity to raise questions about the documentary of our panelists. My experience with these kinds of screenings is that always there are a number of people that are suffering from undelivered speech. And I request that you continue to suffer and not to deliver a speech, but to ask a question of our experts on the issue of immigration. As you think about the kind of questions you want to ask the panelists, let me just say a little bit more about the documentary Gospel Without Borders. On a single DVD comes the documentary in two forms. We watched tonight the short version, the 31-minute version, which is designed for a public forum with a panel and discussion. There is on here a long version that runs some 54 minutes in length, which is designed to be used over 4 weeks in a church Sunday school class or another kind of church event for 4 weeks, where you watch 10 or 15 minutes. 1 week you watch the first chapter, and then the second chapter, and the third chapter, and the fourth chapter, and have a deeper discussion about the issue. As Bishop Taylor is suggesting that members of his parish do during the season of Lent. Know that on ethicsdaily.com we have a leader's guide for the short version and a leader's guide for the long version, and we have a number of other resources available to enrich your dialogue and learning opportunities, including the pastoral letter on immigration that Bishop Taylor issued 2 years ago, I believe, plus his homily on immigration, several sermons on immigration, and a variety of other Bible studies and action pieces which are available in a PDF that you can download for free at ethicsdaily.com. We do have some of the documentaries available for sale out in the foyer of the church. My strategy is that if we can distribute literally tens of thousands of the documentary to be used in churches, then maybe we really will begin to nudge the national ethos in a constructive direction. The good news is that we first printed 5,250 of the documentaries, and we're down to less than 1,000, and are beginning to talk about reprinting the documentary. We hope to reprint it countless times. So I'm going to step aside now, and maybe someone has a question for one of the panelists. This is your opportunity to learn more. So if you would come to one of the mics.
Actually, I'm a professor, so I'm telling you I'm sacrificing keeping this short.
Speak a little louder.
Yeah, I'm a professor over here at UALR, and I'm sacrificing enormously keeping this short. But as you know, just yesterday, the GOP candidates for president had their debate. Every single one of the candidates supported very draconian measures against immigrants, securing the borders, denying citizenship. And these included Catholics, Mormons, and Baptists. And I'm just curious as to, I love this grassroots approach. But if you saw that, what is your impression of what is driving this Republican attack on immigrants?
Who's the question directed at? Who's the question for?
The question really is, what is driving the anti-immigrant fervor among some of the Republicans, especially the presidential candidates, all of the presidential candidates, with one giving some nuance in favor of past support for the DREAM Act and being hammered by the others because he favored the DREAM Act in Texas. So I think did I get that summary correct?
Well, this won't be very flattering, but I think our candidates are driven by the desire to get elected. And they've made a calculation that this is what's going to sell. And that's what I refer to as being a demagogue. And that's the difference between a politician and a statesman. A statesman looks what's for the best, the common good for our society. A politician is in the business of power. And what do I have to say to get elected?
I agree, but I think the word is fear. Capitalizing on fear and being perhaps afraid themselves. Fear of the different, fear of the stranger, a lack of comprehension about the true nature of the economy as it relates to immigrants, and consequently fear of economic consequences of people who are different, who are willing to work hard for a minimum wage, which most Americans won't touch. But I think fear is one of the big issues. And related to that, I think it's interesting to note that this happens periodically in American society. And if you look back, when was it, the 1850s with the Know-Nothing Party? That's what they were called, Know-Nothings. But it's almost exactly the same kind of platform, if you will, that we hear today from people who are so afraid of providing a welcoming opportunity for folks who are not citizens of the United States.
Yeah, and not only are they not citizens, obviously they can't vote, and so it makes an easy scapegoat to say, many of our economic and social woes are due to the actions of these lawbreakers. Let's go get them. Let's go be mean to them, and that'll solve the problem. Vote for me. And I don't think it happens periodically. I think it happens continually. As I had mentioned that in the longer version, I mentioned that my grandfather came over here after World War II by stowing away on a merchant marine vessel. It was war-torn Italy. I'm sure St. Louis seemed a whole lot better. So, and the Italian neighborhoods in St. Louis, I'm sure, were looked down upon by the Anglo neighborhoods up on the hill in St. Louis back in the late 40s, early 50s. So I don't think it's a recurring thing. I think it's a continual thing. The new wave of immigrants get heaped upon.
Very good. Yes, sir. And if each questioner would also introduce themselves.
My name is Manny Sepulveda. I'm a director of Hispanic markets for a marketing firm in Little Rock. But before I ask the question, I want to give you my reasons and motives for asking the question. I found the film inspiring, but more than that, encouraging. I think many of us need to see these kind of visual aids to really understand this complex and difficult issue. But also, we need to see it from the other side of those being affected, that they too need inspiration and encouragement. So my question is the DVD in Spanish? Does it have subtitles in Spanish? Can this be used so that other parts of the Spanish language world see that this is what really America is about, not what's heard on TV? So is it in Spanish? Are you planning to make it in Spanish?
The documentary is not currently in Spanish. We do have a conversation about creating a Spanish version, but we haven't decided if there's enough market to justify it doing that. We also have some concerns, and I think the panel could bring some light to this. We're a little bit concerned originally that if we put subtitles in Spanish, that it would feed the kind of bigotry that exists in society, which says they really don't want to learn our language. And so we were thinking about trying to avoid that bigotry that exists in the Christian community. So that was one of the reasons we did not initially do it, but we do have an ongoing discussion about whether or not to have a subtitled version in Spanish. Carolyn?
Hi, I'm Carolyn Staley. I too appreciate the video, and this is my second time of seeing it. I don't mean this as criticism. I understand that the video helps me be sensitive and to love the people. I found myself now thinking the second time, what are we being called to do? And I almost wish there could be a Catholic, Baptist, Methodist, a Christian call to point A, B, C. What do we need to do besides the obvious is to love and to have compassion? Mm-hmm. But this begs some real questions about action.
Let me just respond by saying that I know the United Methodist Church has done this, and others as well have passed resolutions. I get a little tired of that, frankly, because I think sometimes we pass resolutions and think we've finished the job. But at least have been sensitive enough to pass resolutions calling on action on the part of their constituency. I really believe that what happens with regard to this, though, has to happen in local parishes and local congregations, that for all I might say on a national level, what happens in this church is probably going to make a whole lot more difference. I mean, my voice needs to be heard, and Bishop Taylor's voice is heard. But I think what we really have to depend upon is you. One of the kind of new understandings about how deep change occurs in a society is that in great institutions, in large institutions, people who are part of those institutions have become consumers. And they wait on the folks at the top to deliver to them. And they, like little birds in the nest, they were those mouths open and mama comes and pokes a worm in. We've got to reverse that and make the people at the bottom not consumers, but citizens. People who take action on their own to respond to the greater need around them. We talk about it a lot in terms of the mission field. What's the mission field of the local church or the parish? The work there really has to be a fire in the belly here for deep change to occur. You know, and I think we have to depend on congregations to pick up this.
I'm grateful to know that the Methodists also have a problem with resolutionary Christianity. Baptists have long believed in resolutionary Christianity. We pass resolutions and we solved a problem. Bishop Taylor, I think you have...
Also, we very much need to lobby for changes in law, both federally and on the state level. Immigration laws and also laws regarding human services. And lacking that, I think as Christians we're obligated to step into the breach and provide human services that are not available to our people otherwise. We've got the Westside Clinic here in Little Rock. We've got other clinics that are to help provide medical care. But there are all sorts of other social needs within the undocumented community. Domestic violence is a big issue. Lots of human issues that because no other agency in our society is, our government certainly is not going to help out, that we need to do what we can to kind of step into the breach there. I also tell kids that are born here, remember how they treated your parents when you turn 18. And because there'll be a generation coming up here that will change the voting configuration of our society. And you know, I also tell people that have taken unhelpful attitude politically that, you know, you're digging your own grave for the future because, you know, the voting population is going to change a lot, and people remember the approach you took. But, you know, I think a lot of our people in political life they're just focused on the next election, and just focused on the next, you know, economic cycle, people in business. And but our society will change, and this will get resolved. It's how much misery are we going to create in the process? I think that's the only issue.
Just very quickly to piggyback on what Bishop Taylor just said about the law, and we need to change law. There are about 70 people in this room tonight, and that's really an accurate estimate, not a preacher's estimate. Just suppose our House of Representatives representative over the next 3 or 4 weeks got 70 letters on this one issue.
In Tennessee, we have a conversation going on about trying to show the documentary when the Tennessee General Assembly reconvenes in 2012, and to provide a copy to each senator, and each state senator and each state representative as a way to nudge the process. That's one of the things we're thinking about doing, or some people are talking about doing in Tennessee. I think we have another questioner.
Can I real quickly? I just wanted to add that as a lawyer, as a former congressional staffer, as a political activist on this issue, I'll give you some very pointed advice. Make sure every elected official that you encounter knows of your position on this issue, because the other side is loud. They are vocal, they are passionate, and the people who are compassionate, their voices aren't getting heard. I mean, I'm not down in the halls of the Capitol screaming about this. I'm having civil conversations with legislators that I think can be reasoned with. And we've pushed back in Arkansas. And I encourage you to push our federal congressional delegation to support comprehensive immigration reform, because that will go a long way to solving the civil rights violations that are going on right now. I mean, it's like we have to learn the same lessons every 50 years. Central High, you know, you'd think we'd learn our lesson. And to a certain extent, I think Arkansas has a little bit, because we've gathered a whole bunch of politically active and compassionate folks, religious leaders, civic leaders, civil rights leaders, to push our state legislature to keep them from enacting punitive laws against the immigrant community. And so far, we've held them off. But the other side screams and yells and frightens our legislators, because they're thinking, golly, if these people are screaming this much, they must have power behind their voices, and I'm going to, you know, I have to kowtow to that. But they don't have to, you know? I mean, just like she said, Jim Crow was the law. Doesn't make it right. It's no more right back then than it is now, even though it's now, you know, ostensibly taken care of through the books. But we can't have laws in this country that make one skin tone or one ethnicity a lower right of civil rights protection. Can't happen, but right now it is happening. And, you know, if you pull me over and you look like me, they're not going to ask to see my papers. But there are some people driving around right now, just a couple blocks south of here, that they're going to want to know, you know, let me see your papers. That is unequal treatment. And they're not getting the due process that our Constitution requires. Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had to say that.
Question that she asked. My name is Anika Whitfield. I'm a member of New Millennium. I'm a podiatrist here. I'm an activist, particularly for education and for social justice for everyone. And one of the things that I wanted to ask was pretty much her question. People desire appointed suggestion of how we can do things. Step one, if you said lobbying, when do we go lobby? When's a good time to go lobby? And when would be a good time for a number of people to go lobby, so that there's not just one person going down to the state capitol? Is there a day that we should go and, you know, everybody be united as one and say, we the people? And then secondly, my question is, how can we as the church particularly get more of the we message out, so that we stop having the language of the they and the them. Because a lot of times, again, we see people not the way Christ does, because Christ says, even as you do unto the least of these, not them, you also do unto me. So how can we get those messages out?
I'd suggest staying in close touch with Wendell Griffen. Because we do have a coalition. It's the Arkansas Friendship Coalition. And for state issues anyway, and Bishop Taylor is coming. Have you been to any of our meetings? I'll talk to you about it later. We're going to recruit him too. But there are several state lobbyists that we keep our ear to the ground at the Capitol, stay in touch with the state legislative leaders so that we can find out when or if there's going to be a punitive immigration legislation passed in the state or attempted to be passed in the state legislature. And then we have different activist groups that get mobilized as quickly as we can to let them know, no, that's not acceptable. You know, we don't want you to legislate hate into Arkansas code. And Judge Reverend, whichever you are, Right Honorable Griffen, he's a founding member of our coalition as well. And so if you stay in close touch with him, he'll be hearing from me and Chairman Steve Copley, who is the chairman of the Arkansas Friendship Coalition. That's the way I would suggest to do it.
And I can suggest one thing that is not helpful, and that is to demonize people. You know, because I think Bishop Crutchfield is exactly right. It's fear is the big issue, and so if we can address that and lift the fear, and although I will speak forcefully sometimes, but I hope I never am demonizing someone else, because I recognize that we all share the same broken human condition, and that we all have blind spots, and we all have areas where we feel insecure, and if we can approach those who take an unhelpful attitude from the standpoint of not being adversarial, but rather understanding where they're coming from. But have you considered this? Or have you ever experienced this? Or let me tell you a personal experience I had, so that they can, they're a point of connection where they can relate to that feeling. Have you ever been a newcomer to a place where you didn't know anybody? How did you feel? How welcome was it when you felt welcomed by somebody? Did it really touch your heart? And so anyway, just to try to never forget that we're dealing, even if people that have an ugly attitude, we're dealing with human beings, and they've got their issues, and just to recognize that part of it as well.
One thing that I would say also is that any politician worth his or her salt will want to talk to a constituent. And if you make an appointment, show up on time, spend the time you've asked for and no more, say what you need to say without demonizing anybody. I'm concerned about what happens in our state. I had the opportunity, so I called the governor one day. And Governor Beebe was gracious enough to give me 15 minutes of his time. And I know that, a bishop might get more time than some others, and maybe the call would be thought of, but I'm not suggesting you need to go to the governor. But your state representative or your state senator or your House of Representative person is going to be willing to talk to you when they're back here in town. And if you say, I'd like 5 minutes of your time, what about around immigration? Even if they say no, they will know that someone is concerned about what they think about that issue. Don't go in and harangue. Go in and say your piece, smile, be happy, and leave. And someone once said that, 3 notes written on the back of a brown paper sack could change a representative's vote. Now, it'll probably take a little bit more than that in a large campaign donation these days, but that contact is critical, and it's from people like you. You don't have to have a big organization. That could be helpful, but you don't have to have a big organization to make a difference.
Some other questions?
Bishop Taylor, I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your two bodies of law, higher God's law, and then obviously the United States or state laws. And maybe if you just talk a little bit about how you have taught that, and what reaction you've had of people in different churches, because I see that in other issues too, like the death penalty or things like that, and I think people forget what they know is right and wrong and what they know is the higher moral ground, and it's again a fear. But if you just talk about your experience with that, I really appreciated that comment.
One thing that helps a lot in an American audience is to quote the Declaration of Independence, and where we say that, the writers of the Declaration of Independence were not super church-going kind of people, but they said that they write that everyone is created equal, not just legal residents, and they have inalienable rights from the Creator, okay, and including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a higher law. And a second, and of course, for instance, the right to life includes the right to access to the basic necessities of life. And so in that, people that are unable to provide for their families in their place of origin have an inalienable right to immigrate on that basis. Now, it's not unlimited, because it's limited by the needs of the local community that they're coming to and on down the line. But it is a right that's intrinsic to the person that does not depend on recognition by the state. It's a right that we have from God Himself, and it's a right that no state has the power to take from us. And whenever the state infringes on those intrinsic rights that we have, that law is an unjust law, because it doesn't conform with the order of creation, and they're put there by the Creator. And so for American audiences, there's a lot of places in the Bible where you could make these same arguments, but this is something, but a lot of Americans will kind of divide their religious life from their public life or their citizen type life. So sometimes it's helpful to use documents from our own civil law that all Americans, not just of one denomination or another, would accept as foundational documents for our country of how we conceive of ourselves as a people. Another thing to notice is that the Declaration of Independence also says that a public authority exercises its power with the consent of the governed, not the consent of the citizenry, but all the people that are within the political unit who are subject to the governing authority of that government. And yet we've got a large part of our population who are governed, but whose consent is not sought in the governing of our society. And of course, during slavery, it was a whole slave population. That's why they didn't say citizenry; they said the governed, because African Americans were not regarded as citizens. And so, of course, then this would apply also to our immigrant population now. And so, meaning that our foundational documents not only say that they're intrinsic rights that come from God and that don't depend on recognition by the state, but also that the authority of the state doesn't come from the citizenry, but rather from the governed, the consent of the governed.
Perhaps a chance for one more. If you'll come all the way down front. As you come down, I want to ask our panelists, where did the myth get started about this line? Because that is heard over and over again. There's a line. They've got to go to the back of the line. Where did that get started?
I really have no idea. It's been around as long as I can remember. That, it's like, why don't they just get in line? I think in a very fuzzy theoretical way, there is a line. That's how you come up with that calculation that I gave earlier, that if you're the son of a U.S. citizen, the line, if you got in line in 1992, you're now at the front of the line to come in the United States. Well, shoot, your parents probably dead by now, at that point, and so I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but there's another little factor here that perhaps a lot of people are not aware of, is that when
if you do have a relative that is a U.S. resident or citizen, and so you do have a priority date, and you're one of the minor children of that family, you cannot change your civil status because, like, if you get married, you're no longer a dependent, and so you no longer are included anymore. And so I had lots of people in my parish back in Oklahoma who they had been waiting for, they came to the United States when they were 3 or 4 years old. They've been waiting for 16 years, 18 years. It's time they're ready to get married, and if they get married, then they no longer, they could be deported immediately if they were to get married, because they no longer included in the packet, or whatever you want to call it, of their parent, because they're no longer a dependent.
There's one thing that's important to mention that I failed to mention, and it hardly ever gets mentioned. There's another one of these myths that are floating around out there, that if you are here in the country illegally, why don't they just send in the paperwork to become legal? And there's this notion that people just don't want to, that they don't want to submit the paperwork, that they don't want to pay the filing fees, that they don't want to obey the law, something. I'm not sure what, it's probably a combination of all of those, that this is just a lawbreaker through and through, and otherwise they just submit the papers and get legal. It doesn't work that way. If you came into this country illegally, it is extraordinarily rare to be able to legalize your status. I mean, it's that one fella from El Salvador that was in the film. There are very few countries where they get temporary protected status, which doesn't mean that they're a permanent resident or anything. It just means that there's something so awful that happened back in your country, like a civil war or a giant earthquake or something that is just so major. It wasn't that it was just so bad you couldn't stay there to begin with, which it clearly was for him. It's that some horrible something has occurred, and we go, okay, we're not going to send you back right now. But as soon as the Civil War's over, or they rebuild from the earthquake or whatever, off you go. And that's one of the very rare occasions. Political asylum, if you're on the wrong side of a civil war and you come over here, if you sneak in the country and say, if you send me back there, they are going to kill me, sometimes we'll let you stay, on a case-by-case basis. If you send me back to that country, they will torture me, sometimes an immigration judge will go, well, okay. I mean, I had a client that the U.S. government decided that he had been married before he came into the United States, just like Bishop Taylor was saying. And they said, oh, you were not qualified to come into the country. His mom was a permanent resident and had been for 20 years or something. And he came in the country. He joined the U.S. Army. There was some mix-up in his Army paperwork. The U.S. attorney decided to charge him with visa fraud, arrested him, put him in jail for, I think it was 14 months, had a trial, mistrial, tried him again, and then the judge said, oh, well, you didn't really do what they said you did, but you did file this piece of paper wrong, so I'll give you a 6-month sentence. And he'd already been in jail for 14 months because they wouldn't let him out. And he was from Iran. An Iranian citizen who came over here, joined our U.S. Army, is an engineer for our Army, put in jail for 14 months because of this paperwork snafu. And then they said, oh, and by the way, we're going to deport you. I'm telling you this just to show you how awful it is. He's got U.S. citizen siblings, another brother who's in the U.S. Army, and his mom's a permanent resident. And they said, oh, okay, so we're going to kick you out. He's got a tattoo of his Army company, U.S. Army company, on his shoulder. And we told the judge, if you send him back to Iran, they're not going to believe that you just sent this U.S. Army soldier back to Iran with a tattoo of his Army company on there for anything other than him being a spy, right? I mean, think of what kind of treatment he's going to get back in Iran. And we argued this to the immigration judge, and he was about this close to not believe in us. And the government's attorney said, well, what makes you think that the Iranian government's going to know who you are? He said, everyone knows. And he said, everyone in Iran knows who you are. He said, well, if you Google my name, there's like 4 pages that comes up about what you've been doing to me for the last 4 years. He said, so yeah, I'm pretty sure if you send me back there, they're going to know exactly who I am, and I'm going to be dead after they torture me for a little while. And the judge bought it. And he's not a permanent citizen, but they did the same thing they did, the deferred departure. So he's subject to deportation, but they go, oh, well, maybe the regime will change in Iran, and then we'll send you back. That's what the immigrants face in the United States these days.
Question here, and then David, let's go next. I think you had the next question.
Hello. My name is Dekedra. I'm a student in Judge Griffen's Law and Cultural Competency class. My question is, given the fact of the economy right now and the way that Americans themselves feel as though they are already struggling themselves to find jobs, find ways to take care of their own homes and their own families, everyone is not a believer of Christ. So I understand the love your neighbor and, that this is what God wants us to do. But as for those people who may be in other religions or don't believe in the same God as I do and who feel as though, well, here I am struggling to take care of my family in America, why should we let these people who are not from here come here without, doing the things that are necessary to be here legally? What do us as believers tell these people as far as why they should have the same mentality towards these people as we do?
I've got a good one. Reverend Copley has invited me to speak at various different things, and one, we were talking about it, and just from a purely economic standpoint, if they're coming in legally, which it's incredibly hard to do, as I said before, if they're coming in legally, you have to first prove to the U.S. Department of Labor that there is no U.S. worker that is available to take that job at the prevailing wage. And it takes months, 6-9 months, to prove that to the Department of Labor. And then after you prove it, then you can invite someone to come in to fill that job, that you've proven to the Department of Labor there's no U.S. worker. And that's if you do it legally. If you do it illegally, sure, there are a lot of U.S. employers who are employing people who are undocumented because they can pay them less or give them harsher working conditions than they would have to if they were doing everything above board. But a lot of times, they really are taking this, the employers are taking this legal risk to hire an undocumented worker because there is no U.S. worker around to take some of these cruddy jobs. I mean, it's an economic fact. I've got an uncle who owns a chicken processing plant down in South Arkansas, and he put it there because they've got consistent 10-12% unemployment in this little town. And he was like, oh, great, I've got workers. These are terrible jobs. I'll have workers. No. He still can't get people, and the immigration system is so screwy that he can't even get legal migrant workers to come. So he's in a bind. But back to a topic that Reverend Copley asked me to speak on. I believe that this country's economic vitality is now and has been what it has been for generations, because each generation has a new influx of migrants, and they are the most hardworking, adventurous, and dedicated people in their country. We have always stolen the best, brightest, and bravest from around the world to come here to work over and over and over and over again. I mean, my grandfather didn't stow away on a merchant marine ship because he was lazy or a dullard. I mean, if he was going to be lazy and a dullard, he could have sat on a couch on this little island off the coast of Italy, right? I mean, these people are brave. They're risking their lives and enduring huge sacrifices and risks, almost exclusively to benefit their families. And if I've got a minute, I can explain another part of the puzzle of why the immigration population has grown so much in the past few years. It is a very ironic, unintended consequence of trying to tighten the Mexican border. For generations, they called them migrant. We've heard of migrant laborers. They would come up, they would pick the apples, then they would pick some of the crop, and then they'd go back to Mexico for the winter. And every year they would come in and go, and they left their family back in Mexico. And the men typically would come up here, work as farm workers, and go home. Well, we tightened the border, and now it's much more dangerous and much more expensive to cross that border. So you come up here and you go, well, okay, I'm going to come up here, I'm going to work for 10 years or so, and I'm sending my money back home, and then I'll have enough essentially to retire when I do take that dangerous trip back across the border, right? Well, now you're up here and you're like, well, gosh, I guess I'm going to stay for this long. I might as well bring my wife and kids. And so now you're up here, you got your wife and kids, you've lost your roots back in Mexico, so now you're here. So we're just transplanting whole families instead of just using it as an economic tool that we've used for generations. So it's just a weird, ironic, unintended consequence of them trying to clamp down on illegal immigration. They actually increased the immigrant population quite a bit.
David, why don't you have the last question?
Well, this is actually not a question, it's clarification to your question. From my stereotypical point of view, we got the impression when it occurred on the screen about getting in line, my first thought, that came from Ellis Island. From my stereotypical interpretation of history, when people came through Ellis Island, they got in line. And that's still when I think of immigration, that's where I think of Ellis Island, and I think of people getting in line.
That could be. I want to pick up on what Paul said, just brief, and then we're going to turn it over to Steve Copley, who's going to give us a very practical idea for what we can do that's tangible and immediate. With these two Presbyterian ministers, 11 miles from the Mexican border, in a rural community called Aravaca, we walk those death trails. Make no mistake that it's an easy hop, skip, and jump into this country. It is very dangerous. The rocky, mountainous, uneven. You got to move at night. There's no water. There's no food. It's hot. It's cold. It's very dangerous. One of the things I'd like to do is if we could get big steeple pastors in Arkansas to spend a week down in this No More Deaths camp, carrying jugs of water across these death trails. I think we'd have a conversion of experience of the big steeple pastors in Little Rock, and then maybe that would change the reality of what's going on. Steve, would you come and share a ministry that you're involved in that's very practical and immediate that people can engage in?
You all hear me?
Use the microphone.
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Little background to how this started. Both denominations, Roman Catholic United Methodist Church in Arkansas, deal with immigration issues. And Maricela Garcia, Maricela, will you raise your hand, is the Director of Immigration Services for Catholic Charities. She serves on our Justice for Our Neighbors board. Julie Larson is our regional attorney. If you'll just raise your hand. And in a minute, Melissa Thomas, who's the Assistant Director, will do our prayer. But one day we were discussing a problem that we noted, that what happens when a member of the family is detained? And there really is a way that people in local churches can reach out and get involved, because it really is an enormous issue. You see these cards all the time. They come in all sorts of colors at the grocery store. Right now, there are about 5 counties in Arkansas that have agreements with ICE to serve as detention centers. So when somebody's picked up, one option is sometimes they go to one of these 5 county jails. Well, what happens? We've talked about separation of families and family values. A loved one is separated from their family in many cases. And so they have to somehow keep in touch. What we try to do in that case is we actually physically buy a card like this. And when someone goes to visit, they take the card with a set amount of dollars on there so that that family member can call out to their loved one. Now, once they enter into the federal system and often end up down in Oakdale, Louisiana, it's a little different in that we don't take them a card, but they have a system whereby we can put money on their account and they can go to the basically to a center there and they buy their telephone cards. And therefore, the heart of this is they're able to keep in touch with their families. And both Maricela and Julie can tell you story after story of families that are separated and otherwise they'd have no way of keeping in touch with that loved one, that family member, which is hugely important because the next step for many of them may be back out of the country and back to their home country, and that loved one has never had any contact. So I would encourage you, it's one easy way to get involved and begin to, in a pastoral way, to help folks. And we would encourage you to do that. If you see the longer version of the DVD, we talk a little bit about that in that version.
Then we'll turn the program over to Reverend Griffen.
Thank you, Robert. Again, would you show, as we say back home, some love to Robert Parham and to our panel. You have been very patient, and I do not want to impose on your patience, but I do want to do two things. First of all, I want to thank all of you again for being here this evening. I especially want to thank members of clergy, congregations, clergy leaders, congregational leaders who are here. I want to acknowledge the presence of my law and cultural competence class members here. Stand up, class members, and give yourself some. These are future lawyers. These are future lawyers. I am not trying to make them necessarily more religious, although I am trying to make them just, because I've found that sometimes religious people are not just, but just people aren't hurt by good religion. I want to also acknowledge the presence of members of New Millennium Church who've been here to welcome you. And members of New Millennium, would you please stand up, please? Thank you. Now, let me tell you something. You've seen the DVD. You would love to be able to take it home and show it to other people. And we have copies available for you in the foyer. Griff Stockley of our congregation and Jill Bales and Ora Stevens will be there to help you get a copy of the DVD. They're $10 each. You can get a DVD and take it. They're licensed for home view. If you go on Ethics Daily's website and you want a DVD for institutional purposes, for instance, you want one for your congregation or for your college or for yourself, you can go on Ethics Daily's website, click on the store link. There's a whole line of DVDs that we have on Ethics Daily. Click on Gospel Without Borders. There's an institutional DVD there that's licensed for institutional use. So that's how you can get it, okay? Thank you again for your patience. Now, let me ask Melissa Thomas from Justice for Our Neighbors and ask Anika Whitfield from New Millennium to come and lead us in the benediction. And since you each have a mic there, go for it.
I'd like to ask us to do something unconventional, but we often do this at our worship service. If everyone could stand up, and if we could form a large circle around the sanctuary so we can all hold hands. Now look at each other and see how beautiful we are holding hands. Isn't this beautiful? Smile. Okay. Let us bow in prayer. Lord God, we just thank you for your rich, rich love towards us. Father, when you see us, you see possibility. When you see us, you see all that you have purposed in us. Help us to see one another the way you see us. Help us to see Jesus in others. Help us to see love in others. Help us to see hope in others. Help us to reach out to others as you have taught us to love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Lord God, remind us that justice is not just unless we speak up for even the least of these. Lord God, we thank you for the opportunity not only to be here tonight, but all of the things that you've stirred up in our hearts, so that when we leave this place, we will put our faith into actions. We will put what we've heard into actions, and we will be the change that we really want to see in this world.
A table has been laid and a feast has been prepared. All has been made ready for you and for me. And it is also for the one who is crossing the desert tonight. This feast is for the one who wants something more for their children. And it is for the one who is spending the night tonight in a detention cell, wondering if they will see their family again. There is a feast prepared, and it is enough and more. We are sitting at a table, and we receive the blessing of God, not in what we hold on to, but in what we give. We receive the blessing of God. As we move to the side of this table, and we sing out an invitation to our brothers and to our sisters, and we say, "Come, sit, eat." There is room at this table. Here is a feast, and it is enough and more. May the God of the migrant, the wanderer, the alien, and the stranger among us bless you and keep you. Amen.
Amen.